Good evening, everyone. I hope we're all keeping well. This is really just another update on my Hobbit edit. So the last video I did was about 2 months ago now, and it was really just to say that I'm doing an update on the edit that I did however many years ago it was now. I think it was like 2, maybe 3 years ago or something like that. Really, my update, all it is just better quality footage and better quality audio. And by better quality audio, I mean I think it's in like 5.1 surround now, whereas before it was in stereo. So those are really just sort of like the updates. But whilst I'm sort of back in the editing suite, back in the world of editing The Hobbit, I wanted to sort of take the opportunity to maybe make some alterations to my previous version, things that maybe didn't look as good. There's quite some ropey rotoscoping shots in there and things like that. So just, cleaning it up, smoothing things out like that, but also possibly reordering things and changing some areas. And hopefully we can get some people in the chat, or maybe people can sort of drop a comment after this video is all said and done, because this video is really, well, as you can see from the title, it's called The Problem with Ravenhill. And what I found is, with when I was originally editing this thing and when I'm editing this now, the messiest and kind of choppiest part of this whole film for me is Ravenhill. Most of the time when you're editing the rest of the film, there's usually huge scenes and chunks you can just, cut out and lift straight out of the film, move it together, and you've got a pretty seamless and much more truncated version of the narrative, which is what I'm going for with this. However, when you get to Ravenhill, there's so many moving parts, and the way that it's cut together, it really genuinely does feel like the most slapped together part of the film. And I hate to say that, but it really does. Not to mention, there's certain aspects in there that I feel need to remain from the original film that I'm not too keen on in order to preserve continuity. And this is sort of the big problem I'm having at the moment with this edit, with this update, in that my original edit currently stands at about, I think, Jesus, with credits, like 5 hours, or maybe like 4 hours, 45 minutes, something like that. It's very, very long. And I wanted to try and, with this new updated version, was to cut the film down to make it more of a easier going viewing experience. And I'm kind of torn between that, because part of me thinks this update should just be literally that, an update of the edit that I've already produced. Some people may like it, some people may not like it, but I'm just sort of offering a better quality version of the edit that's already out there that I've made. But then part of me also wants to, essentially, I'm torn between wanting to make this as book accurate as possible, but then also with the notion of, I want this to feel like a good consistent version as a moviegoer, as just a movie experience. Everything's got to be consistent, continuity's got to be there, everything's got to be as perfect as possible, whilst also nudging it in the direction of being more book accurate. And the part where this kind of goes all out the window is in Battle of the Five Armies, sort of during the Ravenhill sequence. So what I've got here is a plan of 4 different endings surrounding the whole Ravenhill sequence, and I want to try and sort of vocalize these endings as best as I can in order to paint a picture of them and get some feedback from you guys as to which you would prefer. So 4 endings, here we go. I'm going to go through them now. The first ending, the first possible ending, is literally just the version of the ending that I already have in my previous edit. And what that is that Bilbo is present during the Battle of Dale. There isn't really much footage of him, but he's just there in the background, chilling as this whole fight is going on. And that's one of the reasons that I'm not too keen on that, is that we don't really get much Bilbo stuff during the actual Battle of the Five Armies itself. He sees Thorin charge out of the mountain. And then Legolas shows up and warns them of the Gundabad army that's about to attack. Thranduil refuses to help, so Bilbo agrees to run up there and to warn Thorin himself. Round about this time, you also have Tauriel trying to convince Thranduil to aid in the cause. He doesn't want to, and then Legolas agrees to travel up there with Tauriel. During all of this, you have Bilbo fighting alongside Fili, Kili, Thorin, and Dwalin, where he's throwing rocks at the orcs, and then eventually he gets knocked out. Tauriel and Legolas show up. Tauriel is killed. Legolas fights Bolg and kills him. And then you have Legolas exchanging Orcrist. And really, Orcrist is the kind of crux of everything at Ravenhill for me, is that sword needs to get back to Thorin. There needs to be a final fight with Azog on the ice. There has to be. I did try an ending where I made it super, super book accurate, where Bilbo flees during the battle. This is actually very, very similar to M4's edit. Bilbo flees during the actual battle itself in order to get to safety. Thorin says that he's going to take out their leader. Bilbo gets knocked out. We fade to black. We fade back in. The Eagles and Beorn show up. And then Bilbo just sees that Thorin has been wounded and that Azog has been killed, all off screen during the fade out. And then we pick the ending of the story up there. And whilst that's very efficient for storytelling methods, I feel like that works for the book and not for the movie. When I rewatch the edit back with that ending, it feels so anticlimactic. Thorin's part has definitely been beefed up in the movies and his presence. And also, I've kind of beefed up Azog's part in the movie as well. I've given him a backstory and I've made him more of the central antagonist to the movie. Then to have the central antagonist and sort of like the secondary protagonist fight and, die or be mortally wounded off camera is really quite a big letdown, I think. It does have its advantages. Number one is the runtime. It really, really cuts down on that and gets the film sort of done and dusted in a very neat sort of like 4 and a bit hours, I think. Also, you can kind of fill in the blanks of stuff that's in the book that isn't in the movie. So like Fili and Kili, they don't die that way in the book. Like there isn't a moment where Azog holds Fili up and kills him in front of Thorin, and then Kili dies by getting stabbed by another orc, and then there's no moment where Thorin says, "Let's split up, gang. Fili and Kili, you scout out the towers, and I'm going to stay here." There's none of that. There's a line in the book where it says, "Fili and Kili died defending their uncle with shield and body," I think is the line, or something close. And the imagery that conjures in my mind is so much more tragic and epic than what we actually get in the movie. So if you do have the fade to black, and then fade back in, your mind can kind of go, well, if I've read the book, and eventually we get the funeral scene right afterwards, so we see that Fili and Kili have died, and that would actually be very similar to the book. The book's kind of offhanded with it. It's like Thorin died, oh yeah, and also Fili and Kili died as well. That would kind of be the equivalent in the movie, where if you did fade to black with Bilbo getting knocked out and fade back in, we can see visually that the main antagonist orc, Azog, is dead. He's lying there on the ice with a sword stuck in his chest. And then we see Thorin fall down. And then right after that, during the funeral, we also see the bodies of Fili and Kili. And we as an audience member will go, oh, shit, okay, I guess Fili and Kili died as well during all of that. But it does feel really anticlimactic from a movie-going perspective, from a storytelling perspective. And of course, you can get away with that in the book. Tolkien does that a lot throughout the Hobbit and all of his works, actually, is that characters find out things in hindsight. And I actually do like in films where characters learn or discover things the same time that we, the viewing audience, do as well. So I think that this particular ending of the fade out would have its advantages. For example, with Bilbo getting knocked out, we'd be completely clueless as to the fate of all of these characters ourselves. And then when Bilbo comes to and looks over and sees Thorin, we might think, oh, cool, Thorin saved the day. He killed the orc look and everything's all hunky-dory. And then he collapses on the ice. And we're like, oh no, something's... So we're discovering that the same time that Bilbo is. And I think that's really cool. However, when I did watch it in context of the film with that ending, it's so anticlimactic, it was laughable. And I think because I've beefed up the part of the antagonist orc, Azog, I've given him a bit more of a motivation. You kind of want to see that rivalry play out in some kind of ending fight. Now, do I like that ending fight where Azog all of a sudden has pulled a ball and chain out of his ass from somewhere? I still don't know where he gets that thing. He just has it. The actual fight he has with Thorin, where he's got like the mace and they're like sword fighting, that fight I don't mind. It feels like it's more aggressive, and you get the actual weight of that conflict behind it. But then as soon as he's flailing that stone around and breaking up the ice, I'm kind of out of it at that point. But the film does need a big fight between them, just functionally as a movie. And I've come to appreciate that now. It'd be like the equivalent in Fellowship of the Ring. All of the stuff with Boromir and Boromir's last stand, all of that happens off page. And Aragorn gets there and it says, like there's the body of the orcs around him, the body of the Uruks around him, and Boromir's been wounded with many wounds. And it's like, oh, okay, like that works for the book. But in the movie, you couldn't have all of that shit happen off screen. It'd be ridiculous, especially for the ending of the movie. So I understand why certain decisions have to be made for the film. Now, the issue is, you got to have that ending fight, right? I've come to understand that now. You've got to have Thorin going toe-to-toe with Azog on the ice. There's one small problem, as I've mentioned. Orcrist, the sword that Thorin uses to fight Azog with, is in possession of Legolas. Legolas, unfortunately, I have tried so many times to get rid of Legolas, and Legolas just has to be there to facilitate that exchange. Which takes me on to another possible ending here. I can see you've got Kurt the Gamer. I'm going to get to your comments in just a second. I'll just read the second ending out. So, the second ending, and I want to get your opinions on this. Bilbo is present during the Battle of Dale. Again, there's not much footage of him. He's just chilling there. He's just somewhere in Dale, keeping himself safe. He sees Thorin charge out of the mountain. So far, this is very similar to the ending that I originally had anyway. Legolas shows up and says there is a second army approaching. However, by this point, Thorin has already said we're going to take out their leader. So Thorin has a head start on Bilbo at this point and has already traveled up there. Bilbo agrees to run up to Ravenhill and to warn Thorin of the attack. However, when he gets up there, he's too late. By this point, Fili has already been killed, and Thorin and Kili have already begun engaging the orcs and Azog. Bilbo arrives shortly afterwards, and is promptly knocked out by Bolg and the Gundabad orcs. We then have Kili being killed by Bolg. And then we have Thorin sort of on the ice. We then just have a shot of Legolas scaling the mountain. There's a shot of him sort of scrambling over the rocks. I think in the original movie, he's looking for Tariel's body, and he's like looking around. I just cut to that scene of Legolas. He's trying to assist. He's climbing up the rocks. He sees Thorin's in danger, and he throws the sword. That is it. There is no Tariel in this ending. And Legolas just happens to be scrambling up the rocks to try and help them. He's just in the right place at the right time, and it's literally just there to facilitate that sword exchange. I don't know if I'm keen on that ending. I think if Legolas just randomly showed up like that, it'd be incredibly awkward. And this kind of leads to the snowball effect, which I'm going to get onto in a second. Kurt the Gamer says, it's too bad we can't bring the actors back and just film new scenes. I know. And AI is what it is. Who knows, in a few years maybe, or maybe another decade, we'll have the opportunity to actually create scenes from whole cloth. I don't know if AI is going to get there anytime soon, but it has made leaps and bounds. And there are some aspects of AI that I may use in this edit very, very sparingly. I haven't really decided whether I'm going to do that or not. I might use AI voices. That actually has got really, really good. For an example of this, one of the ideas I was toying with was having old Bilbo narrate throughout the entire movie. So the beginning of my edit, and indeed the beginning of An Unexpected Journey, you have Ian Holm, who introduces the story, and he's the framing device. And I use that aspect in my edit to some degree. I have a bit of a sort of Kate Blanchett Kate Blanchett-esque voiceover at the beginning with Ian Holm, and then we're into the story, and then the story just plays out. But I was toying with the idea of, once you establish that voiceover with old Bilbo, and the idea of the Hobbit being the memoirs of Bilbo himself, would it be cool to keep that voiceover running periodically throughout the movie, not until it outstays its welcome, but just in certain moments, just to punctuate the story, or to get across information to the audience that the film itself was lacking or didn't get across, or to get over some of those more book accurate aspects. And I am still playing with that idea. I don't know if I like it. Part of me thinks it would be really cool and would fulfill sort of the function of what the Hobbit story is, and that it is the memoirs of Bilbo. And then part of me thinks, or maybe a voiceover would get in the way. And if you compare it to the Lord of the Rings, Kate Blanchett doesn't keep that voiceover going all the way throughout the Lord of the Rings. It's just at the beginning there to facilitate that prologue and that entry into the story. But JX gave it a go. And if you go to JX Editor's channel, he's got a video on there where he's utilized the Ian Holm old Bilbo voice. And it's fantastic. Like, I'm a big fan of it. It hits all those spots. There's book accurate lines in there, direct lines from the novel that he's placed fantastically in his own edit, in this own little short edit of The Hobbit. And I'd recommend everyone checking that out. It's a really, really cool video, and probably gives an insight as to what it may look like should I choose to pursue that. I haven't really decided if I like the idea of that or not, or if it'd be applicable. Kurt the Gamer says, I like the way they did it in the animated version. We hear that some of the dwarves died, but we only see Thorin and Bomba die, and it's less important exactly who died, but more just how tragic. Yes, I agree. Yeah, and I did rewatch that fairly recently in order for some. Well, I just wanted to watch it because I think it's a wonderful adaptation. It's really funny. It's really charming, and I like the music in it and some of the animation. But I was also watching it to remind myself of how they did the Battle of the Five Armies and how they handled it, and it's very accurate. It's pretty accurate. They kill off way more of the dwarves, though. That always surprised me. I think they say out of the 13, 6 survived or something like that, so they definitely kill a lot more dwarves. Kurt says, maybe when they escape from Mirkwood, you could add a shot of the dwarves stealing their weapons back from the elves. You wouldn't even have to get their faces, just fill a room with weapon replicas, get a bunch of friends to wear the same costumes the dwarves wear, and show them from behind coming out of the room with the weapons, voila, Thorin has Orcrist again. That's fine. See, one small change in the script would clear all of that up. Just have Thorin fight Azog with the Regal Sword. Just have him, when he charges out of Erebor in his heroic charge at the end, just let him keep the Regal Sword that he has. Unfortunately, I think it clashes with Azog's mace and it snaps in half, and he only has like a little fragment of it, and then that's when he gets Orcrist, because we got to have him fight with Orcrist, right? So it's frustrating. And I know that at the end of the story, Orcrist is laid upon the tomb, and you see it in the extended edition where he's holding the sword. So if we're going with that with the movies, Legolas currently is in possession of that sword. So we do need Legolas in there in some way, shape, or form to facilitate that change. Which takes me on to ending number 3. It's essentially the same ending that I had for ending number 2, where, as I mentioned, like, Bilbo is still present during the battle. He sees Thorin charge out. Thorin says that he's going to take out their leader, and Bilbo decides to run up there and try and warn him. However, he gets up there and he's too late. The difference is with this ending is that I add Toriel and Legolas back into the final conflict. So you have Toriel trying to help out. She is killed when she sacrifices herself, throwing herself and Bolg off the ledge. Unfortunately, she dies in the process, but Bolg survives. Legolas sees this, jumps off the tower, smashes the tower down with the troll, has a final fight with the with Bolg, and then throws the sword up to Thorin. So it's more of what we get in the original film, downplayed somewhat, and obviously I'm killing Toriel off in this edit. So again, it's straying. It's the snowball effect. Now, the snowball effect I mentioned earlier, what is the snowball effect? Ultimately, you want to cut this film down to its most ergonomic and narrative focused design. To do that to its nth degree, you have Bilbo getting knocked out, fading to black, fading back in, and finding that Thorin has been killed. And then at the funeral scene, we find that Fili and Kili have also died. You have no Legolas, you have no Toriel, and it saves you a whole bunch of runtime. The issue is with that, when you watch it as a movie, it feels massively anticlimactic, and it doesn't feel earned, and it doesn't feel like a good ending. It kind of lacks impact somewhat. It feels like there's a lot of missing parts, which of course there is. So the snowball effect, right? We'll add Fili and Kili and Thorin fighting, and we'll do all of that. The issue, the snowball effect, right? Well, if you're going to have that final fight scene, you need Orcris to get back to Thorin. Okay, the snowball effect. How are you going to get the sword back to him? Well, you've got to have Legolas in there. And it's like, okay, but Legolas can't randomly show up, because earlier in the film he said he hated dwarves. You know, do not think I won't kill you, dwarf. It would be my pleasure. There's no love lost between Legolas and the dwarves at this point. So why would he go up there of his own volition? Why should he care? Well, Toriel really wants to go, and he's in love with Toriel. And, you know, she's the one who thinks that Thranduil shouldn't be so isolated, and he's very arrogant, and he only looks after his own people. He doesn't care, you know, he cares not about all the other races of Middle-earth and all the other lands. He's just focused on his isolationism and his own people, and she's not okay with that. So we need to add Toriel into the mix then. So we need Toriel in the mix, so that Legolas can be convinced to go up to Ravenhill, so that we can have Legolas get the sword to Thorin, so that Thorin can fight Azog, so that we can have a conclusive ending. And it's this snowball effect that adds to the swelling runtime. Not to mention that, okay, right, well, now we've got Toriel in the movie then. Well, she can't just show up there at like the very end of the movie. We need to sort of, you know, integrate her as a character somewhere earlier on in the movie. But we don't want too much of her. We can't have all of her love triangle stuff, because that's some of the worst stuff in the movie. Well, we introduce her at the Woodland Realm then. And we add the scene back in of her talking to Thranduil, where he mentions that Legolas has grown very fond of her, and, you know, the whole class dynamic, that she's a lowly sylvan elf and he's an elvish prince, and the two can't be together. We facilitate some kind of romantic interest between the two of them to lay the groundwork. And then by that point, we're essentially back to what my original edit was. And this is why I have this dilemma. I'm thinking I want to try and cut it down, because 4 hours, 45 minutes, pushing 5 hours, is a ridiculously long time to watch a film for. Now, because it has an intermission, you could quite comfortably watch like the first 2.5 hours, go and take a break, come back to it the next day, and then watch the next 2.5 hours, the ending, and sort of view it as two halves. Or if you've got a free day, you get some mates around, you could power through and watch all 5 hours. And I'm still torn between that. That is sort of like the most complete version of the story that still functions as a movie. There's elements in there I don't like Toriel and Legolas and a whole bunch of stuff at the Battle of the Five Armies. But I've kept everything that I feel needs to be there in order to facilitate a smooth run and continuity for the ending. Which takes me on to the fourth and final possible version of the ending with Ravenhill, and I want to get your guys' opinion on this as well. I recently rewatched some of M4's edit, which is fucking outstanding. Like, the work that M4 did on his edit is amazing. There's so much of it that I enjoy. And one of those scenes is Bilbo putting on the ring during the Battle of Dale and escaping. I did try that when I was doing my edit years ago, and I could never get it right, because it always felt like Bilbo was too much of a coward. It felt like all of his friends, you know, Gandalf was fighting and Bard was fighting, and Bilbo just didn't give a shit, and he just runs off and escapes. And because of that, that's why I never ran with that ending. I felt like it made Bilbo seem too cowardly. Whereas the way that M4 has it is fantastic. And it's exactly how it is in the book, where Bilbo feels like he's completely in over his head. He tries to get Gandalf's attention, but Gandalf's in the thick of it. Gandalf's fighting for his life. and Bilbo just, you know, takes himself around the corner, puts the ring on, and just gets out of it, and we see him ducking and dodging. The placement of that scene in M4's edit as well is fantastic. You have the Darkest Hour scene where the music gets really somber, and the pendulum swings, and the enemy starts to push back and starts to save the day, and the somber music really helps that, you know, the peril of the situation and the dire straits of the situation of Bilbo escaping, which I really appreciate. And that kind of fills in that gap of why we don't see much of Bilbo during the battle. Like the book says, Bilbo puts his, I think Tolkien says something like, I dare say Bilbo put his ring on earlier on in the affairs, or something like that. He mentions that very, very early on into the battle, Bilbo was out of it, and I really like that M4 was able to integrate that, and I think he does it very, very well. Right after that, you have Thorin charging out of Erebor. Of course, you're not going to have Bilbo declaring that the dwarves, they're rallying. You know, Bilbo's kind of like a hype man in that moment in the film. You're not going to have that scene because Bilbo's making his way downtown, walking fast to Ravenhill. Thorin charges out, and you have the scene where he meets Dane Ironfoot on the battlefield, and he says, we're going to take out their leader. Right after that, I would have Legolas showing up and warning Gandalf that there is a second army approaching. After this, Bilbo's already escaped at this point. We then cut to Bilbo at Ravenhill, who is promptly knocked out, and that's pretty much Bilbo's involvement for the whole ending Ravenhill sequence. And then this is where I'd start to flesh the ending out a little bit more. Gandalf would then try and get the attention of Thranduil, who would refuse to help. You'd have the Tauriel conversation. So Tauriel would still be part of this conversation. Thorin, Fili, and Kili. You know, Fili would die. Thorin and Kili would start fighting the orcs and Azog. And then the ending would play out the same as I've got it in my edit, with Tauriel and Legolas going up there. Tauriel dying. Legolas has a fight with Bolg on the broken tower. He would throw Orcris back, and then we have our final fight. So that ending there is kind of a Frankenstein's monster, really, if you will, of M4's edit and my previous edit, in that Bilbo wouldn't be present during the Battle of Dale and would escape, which fills in that gap of Bilbo not having much to do during that whole Battle of Dale. But the trade-off is that then you don't get much Bilbo during the fight at Ravenhill because he's unconscious. And then it's just kind of like the Thorin, Fili, Kili, Tauriel, and Legolas show for about 10 minutes of them just fighting with no Bilbo inclusion. The problem with Ravenhill, there you go. That's the title I present for this video. It's all over the place. Now, one thing that I love about M4's edit as well, I just want to mention this too, about his ending at Ravenhill, is that the way he's edited it, he's managed to get rid of Dwalin out of the ending. I was always confused about that, in that, why is Dwalin there? Because of that, Thorin kind of shows up and saves Bilbo at one point. But then after Bilbo's knocked out, we don't see Dwalin at all. He's just gone. Like, Fili is killed, Kili is killed, Thorin's fighting. We don't cut back to Dwalin. Dwalin's just gone. And I know there was originally a deleted scene there where there was going to be a shot of Dwalin trying to get to Thorin. So it's just weird to have him go with the group, but then to do nothing with him, and he just kind of disappears. I'm just thinking, well, why have Dwalin there in the first place? Just get rid of him. And M4 is able to achieve that. The way he's edited around that whole sequence, you don't miss Dwalin at all. It just keeps it to Thorin, Fili, and Kili. Love that. He's also able to get rid of the goats as well, that they ride up to Ravenhill. The goats are weird. you could maybe justify them, because even in the theatrical version, I think you can see some of the dwarven chariots very, very sparingly in the background. It's weird that they manage. So during, they charge out of Erebor and they're in the thick of it, and Thorin's like, we're going to go and take out their leader. He then has to try and locate Fili, Kili, and Dwalin somewhere on that battlefield, pull them out of the fray, and say, right, we're going to get up to Ravenhill. Now we need some goats. Right, let's round up some fucking goats. Let's go. I don't see that happening. no. So the fact that M4 is able to get rid of the goats and just have them sort of run up there on their own and keeps it to just Thorin, Philly, and Killy, I think is an incredibly attractive aspect to his edit at the ending, and that's something that I'd love to try and keep in my edit as well, if possible. But yeah, it's essentially, I guess what I'm trying to say is that I really don't want Toriel and Legolas there, and I'm trying to cut my edit down from 4 hours 45 minutes to something more palatable, maybe like 4 hours 10 or something like that, breaking even with the Return of the King. But it's incredibly hard to do, and I don't want to cut my edit down so much and remove so much that my edit essentially becomes like every other person's edit who's, you know, had a crack at editing the Hobbit films. I want my edit to sort of be what it is and be presented as it was. And this is where the dilemma is. I'm like, should I just update the version I've already done? Should I just stick to my guns? And, you know, back then, however many years ago, I felt like Toriel needed to be in there to help Legolas's character, to facilitate that Orcrist change, to have that final battle. I made those decisions like 2 or 3 years ago. There was a reason that I made those decisions. Should I just stick to my guns and keep my edit as it is, warts and all? You know, I have to work with the footage that I've got. Or do I take this opportunity to try and tweak some aspects to my original take on it? And if there's any place to do it, I feel like Ravenhill is that place to do it, because I really dislike that sequence in the movie. It's probably my least favorite bit in the film. So I need your guys' help. I need your guys' advice. Counsel me. What do you think I should do? So progress has been pretty slow but steady. I sort of have a rough cut in place. I've taken the footage and the audio and I've just kind of rough cutted it to match what I did originally. But now I'm kind of in the throes of editing Ravenhill and trying to just get a version of that I like. If I'm going to keep it the same as I originally did, then that should be easy enough to do. I can just throw it all together, but there's not going to be many changes in there. It's going to be as it is with Toriel in there. And yeah, I'm kind of repeating myself now, essentially, is what I'm saying. I don't want Toriel in there, but I fear to make the movie function as it is, she needs to be in there. Otherwise, if you just cut it where Bilbo gets knocked out and that's it, you ain't going to have an ending and it's going to be incredibly anticlimactic. Or you do what other edits have done and just ignore the fact that Thorin all of a sudden is fighting with Orcrist on the ice, and they kind of hope that the audience doesn't notice that that sword is Orcrist when it quite clearly is Orcrist. So that's not an option. Whilst narratively that is better to ignore it and just pretend it's a normal sword, because then you can eliminate Legolas and Toriel almost entirely. I notice shit like that, and that would bother me. That is a huge plot hole. I'd be watching that and being, you know, I'd go, well, that's Orcrist. Well, how has he got that? Legolas has got that. What the fuck? So that's why I put Legolas back in order to get that sword back to Thorin. And then, as I mentioned, because Legolas needs to be in there to get that sword back to him, you kind of need to give a reason as to why, because we've established that Legolas hates the dwarves. Toriel is that narrative function. She is there to convince Legolas to go up there at the very end of the film. And if you're going to have Toriel in there, you need to sprinkle at least a couple of scenes of her in earlier in the film to establish that she's in love with Legolas, but Thranduil won't allow it because of the, you know, she's a lowly sylvan elf. She's kind of not worthy for her son. You kill Toriel off at the end, which is very, you know, Legolas is very sad about this. And then Legolas ends up throwing the sword to save Thorin. That's another thing I hate as well. I hate the part where he throws the sword, because Legolas is like halfway down a fucking waterfall. I don't know how far you can throw a sword. I am so sad that I actually researched this. I went onto YouTube and I typed in like sword throwing, or how far can you throw a sword, or maybe I went on Google and found like a Reddit page. Anyway, it took me to a video of this like weapons expert, or what do you call them? The guys that like recreate historical. You go to a castle and you see people dressed up in sword fighting, reenactors. And he mentions that if you've got like a crossguard sword and you throw it forward and kind of twist it, it can fly about 12 feet, 10 to 12 feet. And that's in a straight line. Legolas gets a sword, overhand throws it upwards about 50 feet up a waterfall. And how fast that sword travels, it flies so fast that it impales the orc that's about to kill Thorin. That shit ain't happening. That is physically impossible. I hate it. I hate it so much. It breaks everything. And I'm trying to make physics make more sense in my edit. You know, getting rid of certain scenes like the bit where Bard uses his son as, you know, to sort of like write the arrow and like the ballista. That was awful. That was terrible. I hated it. That's out of my edit. That's not happening. But there are certain things, as I say, I'm kind of beholden to what happens in the movie. I just wish I could change it. I wish I had the power to change it. Kurt says, I always found it weird that Thorin took only 3 dwarves with him, 4 in the extended edition. Well, you know, no, he takes 4 in the extended edition. Oh, okay, yeah. I guess Balin is in the chariot. Yeah, that chariot scene is a piece of shit. Anyway, I hate that chariot scene. Like, you could watch it and just go, "Oh, it's fun, like action schlock." Fair enough, but the whole point of that, I thought, what the whole point of that scene was, you know, Dane says to Thorin, after Thorin sort of jumps on a goat and says, I'm going to go up to Ravenhill, Dane quite rightly says, and how do you plan to fight your way single-handed to Ravenhill? And right on cue, Balin, Dwalin, Fili, and Killy are in the chariot behind. And you think, oh, great, the chariot's going to charge in front, and it's going to clear a path for Thorin, and Thorin's going to follow in tow. They're going to clear the path, and he's, you know, they're going to help him get him up to Ravenhill. But no, that's not what happens. Very, very quickly, well, Thorin leads off anyway, and is making great progress through the ranks and ranks of orcs single-handedly. And then the chariot veers off, and we follow this little side quest of the chariot. And then Thorin shows up at the entrance to Ravenhill at the same time as the chariot anyway. Well, I'm like, well, what was the point of that scene? You set up the fact that it's impossible for Thorin to get to Ravenhill single-handed, but that's precisely what happens. It's awful. I hate that scene so much. You know, taking out all of the crazy cartoon antics aside, which are ridiculous and I hate, but just narratively, it's like, we're wasting time, and that's why the extended edition of Battle of the Five Armies is so frustrating. As a film, it's probably stronger than the theatrical version. Just narratively, there are certain scenes in there that absolutely should have been in there, namely Thorin's funeral, which I can't believe was removed, which ties up the whole Arkenstone thing. And as much as I hate the scene, it gives an ending for Alfred's character as well, which isn't in the original version. But still, there's, you know, that whole chariot sequence is about 3, 4, 5 minutes long, isn't it? And I just think, imagine if we had that 5 minutes to flesh out the ending more, or imagine if that 5 minutes was given to finishing off all the Beorn scenes for the ending. I just, it makes me so mad. Carl says, sounds like you want to tweak the edit. I feel if you just update your current edit, it will keep bugging you about re-editing the footage. What does your gut say? I wish I knew what my gut said, man. I'm so torn. Part of me thinks the edit I made before, there's a reason I made that edit, and there's a reason that I made those decisions. And in order to kind of preserve the work I did on that edit and sort of my statement, if you will, in the great fan editing community that's had a go at the Hobbit films, I'd kind of like to just leave my edit the way it was in some way and just update the quality of the footage. The issue is, like, and I'm sure, you know, JX, if you're watching as well, as a creative, you're never finished with a project. There's always new ideas. There's always that thought, oh, maybe I could have done it in that way. You kind of watch what other people are doing as well and go, oh, I really liked that. So I'm going to use that as an idea, but I'm going to put my own spin on it or maybe change it in some way. There comes a point where you have to just say, I need to just get this out there. And just say it's done, because otherwise it will never be done. And I feel like this project will never be done. I mean, I was on the original for what, like 8 years from beginning to when I eventually got it out there. And there's loads of things that I'm happy with in that edit. And, you know, I've had some really nice comments on it, and I've had some great criticism and feedback on it as well. Feedback that of course, I'm taking into consideration, and I'm probably integrating into the final edit. I guess I wanted to get everyone's opinion. Like, as you know, if you have seen my edit, do you mind that it's like 4 hours 45 or 5 hours, or this really unwieldy runtime? Would you rather have that complete version of the story that you can maybe watch the first half at one point and then the second half at another point? Or would you prefer a much more cut down version, maybe to something like 4 hours 10 minutes, the same length as the extended edition of Return of the King, where you can just have a one and done Hobbit movie that is somewhat okay to watch? You know, 4 hours 10 minutes is still a very, very, very long time for a film, but it's much more manageable than 5 hours. So I don't know. I am really torn, and really, you know, this is why I'm doing this video. This is why I want to get you guys involved as well, and get your, you know, to get everyone's input as to what you enjoy. Because a lot of story stuff happens in The Hobbit. That's the issue. You know, a lot of people say, oh, this film could have been done in like 1 2-hour movie, 1 3-hour movie. I'm like, nah, absolutely not. If you're doing justice to The Hobbit, although it is a very small book, so much stuff happens, and you would not be able to do it unless you really massively breeze through it like the animated Hobbit did, which in my opinion is still probably the best adaptation of The Hobbit. I'm not going to lie. I know it misses things out like Beorn and stuff, but I think it still makes the plot work. Kurt says, I feel like that's the lazy route. The goal of an edit is that a person watching it wouldn't know it was an edit if they weren't told beforehand. Yeah, I agree. One of my biggest I say this, but a lot of the rotoscoping that I did on my original edit, I'm not pleased with, and does look terrible. Some I thought turned out okay, but other aspects I'm thinking, look, that looked really ropey. And to be honest, I was really down to the wire, and I just wanted it out for December. So I'm going to remove some of those scenes that looked really, really wonky. But yeah, my main goal when I do fan edits is that I want the cuts to be invisible as possible, and I want continuity to be preserved as much as possible. Some edits just don't regard that and just think, well, I'm going to remove this scene, but I'm like, well, hang on, that character was over there in that shot, and now all of a sudden they're over here. Even if you hate that middle bit, but you can see the character walk from there to there, I'd keep that scene in, because I'm like, well, that character, we have to see that. You know, they can't just be teleporting around in the back. Actually, this is a good point. Sorry, Kurt, I'll come back to your comment in just a second. JX says we can fix those rotos with AI. That's a good point. I mean, that's probably one of the biggest breakthroughs and biggest changes in sort of the fan editing landscape since I did my project, which was, I think it was in the December of 2001, wasn't it? So quite a few years ago now, maybe. It was either 2021 or 2022. I forget. It was either one of those. But AI, it's not fantastic at the moment, but it can be very, very good for short little small shots, small little scenes that you can sprinkle in. I'm not going to give anything major away, but I will tell you guys, and JX, I hope you don't mind if me saying this, you have shown me certain footage of an edit or aspects of an edit that you're working on where the results are phenomenal. And it was an idea that JX had and pitched to me a few years ago, actually, and said, oh, wouldn't it be cool if this film had have done this thing, or this character had have been at the beginning of this certain film? And I was like, yeah, I wish we'd have got that. He's done it, and it's great. And I won't give anything else away because I don't know when JX has got a planned release for that, but I really hope he gets that out at some point for you guys to see, because it's pretty special. And I'm going to keep it as vague as that for now. But go and subscribe to JX Editor. He's got some good stuff about to come out. Kurt the Gamer says, I'm all right with Alfred just sorry. I can't talk. It's been a long day. I'm all right with Alfred just dying when Smaug attacks Lake Town. Okay, so this takes me on to a scene that I remember at the time me and JX were very proud of, but in hindsight, I don't know. I like the narrative function of it, but the effects maybe are a little bit wonky now. And it is the fate of Alfred and the Master. So in the actual movie, the body of Smaug, after he's killed and falls from the sky, conveniently lands on the Master of Lake Town's boat with Alfred in there. No, he pushes Alfred out before, doesn't he? But I wanted to be more truer to the book, and I wanted to have that moment where you see the Master of Lake Town and Alfred wandering through the wastes. Here we go. Yeah. You see them wandering through the wastes and they're kind of trudging through the mud. And the Master of Lake Town's got a horse and cart with chests full of gold. And it's really cumbersome. I've actually used the footage from a movie called Ironclad with Paul Giamatti. And, you know, the horses are getting stuck in the mud and the people can't push the cart full of gold. And then there's just a shot of the Master and he's looking like he's full of cold or full of flu and sickness. And he's kind of bundling himself up in the cold. And then we just see a chest that's fallen out of his cart that's opened up and all the gold scattered in the mud. And I think it is a very poetic image. And I think it is as true as I can get to the fate of the Master of Lake Town. Not many people seem to like that scene. And in fact, most people, apart from JX, were quite unanimous that that scene didn't belong there, and you could visually tell that it belonged to a different film. It didn't really match the same visual quality, and I think some people thought that it detracted too much from it. So I might remove that scene. However, I'm never going to get rid of the original edit that I've already posted. I'm not going to do a George Lucas and wipe it from, existence. It will still be there. So I don't know. Is an offhanded line, is a ADR line saying that the Master of Lake Town has escaped with all of the gold sufficient enough to just write the Master of Lake Town out of the film? Or do we need to see his fate and what happens to him? I don't know. The only way that I could do that is with Ironclad, and unfortunately the footage is different. The costumes are going to be slightly different. And again, if I am going for continuity, then maybe it's probably not the best way to go. But I don't know. I liked the idea at the time, but a lot of people are pretty unanimous that it does stick out like a sore thumb. So I probably will end up removing that from the final product, I would imagine. Sorry, JX. Kurt the Gamer says, maybe the rotoscoping would solve the Orcris problem. You don't rotoscope Orcris during the final battle, and the audience will go, that's clearly not Orcris because it doesn't glow. It's a neat idea, but his sword is already broken before that point, and when you look at it, it is quite clearly Orcris. Orcris has a very, very distinct design, incredibly elvish design, and there's a lot of close-ups of that sword itself, so I don't think I could get rid of that. I was also thinking about maybe outsourcing the project to much better visual effects, and much better editors than myself, to see if it could be if the sword could be removed digitally and a new sword could be placed in digitally in order to get rid of Orcris. Because there's so many moving parts during that fight scene, that would probably rack up thousands and thousands of pounds to, give that to another company or another editor. And I wouldn't expect anyone to do that kind of work for free. I kind of need to work with the footage that I have, and for better or worse, I feel like maybe Tauriel and Legolas need to be in there. Also, as I don't particularly like Legolas and Tauriel. I don't think even in my edit they get much setup or much of a character. We don't really feel anything when Tauriel dies at the end because she's had a handful of scenes in part 1. But I do kind of like that notion, and the Hobbit book is kind of like this by design, that all of the characters that are set up in the book, in the first half of the book, all kind of come together during the Battle of the Five Armies. So you have the Eagles that take them to the Carrack, and you have Beorn set up earlier in the book, and they show up at the very end. Not to mention the goblins from earlier that are pissed off. They show up again at the end, and everything comes to a head. Everything that's been set up. So if I have Tauriel and Legolas set up at the Woodland Realm, those characters would be returning in some way at the end, in some kind of meaningful way, meaningful at least in terms of the narrative and everything like that. So there is that aspect to it as well. And this is the compromise that I guess I'd have to make, in that when you're doing a fan edit of a movie that has a lot of good elements to it, but some parts that you really hate, you are essentially beholden to what you have to work with, and it still has to function. So there will be moments in there that you still hate, and you still wish with every fiber of your being that you could change, but you can't. You can either nudge it in a slight, you can either nudge it in a better direction, according to you. You can maybe move scenes around to help with pacing and the flow of the narrative and the structure of everything. You can nudge it in a better direction, but inherently you still have the same raw materials to work with. And I'm kind of like that with it. Tariel and Legolas are in the movie, and I still have them in my version of the film, but I've downplayed them. I've removed sort of like the most egregiously offensive scenes of both of those characters. I've removed the love story with Killy. I've removed their whole quest to Gundabad, and I've removed what else? Just like the really kitschy scenes between the two. I've removed that whole skirmish in Lake Town. All of that's gone. A lot of the over-the-top acrobatic shit with Legolas is gone. Most of the antics during the barrel's gone. So I have them still in there, but I've downplayed everything. And as much as I wish I could just remove them out of the film entirely, they still serve the function they need to serve without a lot of the really worst offender scenes, if that makes any sense. So, yeah. Yeah, Kurt the Gamer says the additional scene of Alfred and the Master clashes with the tone of the rest of the scene. That's fair, yeah, because I have Bard being hailed a hero. You've got the survivors on the shores of the Long Lake, and then you cut to the Master and Alfred there. Originally in the book, we get the fate of the Master in a conversation with Balin, literally on the last page of the book, where once all said and done, many years later, Gandalf and Balin show back up at Bilbo's place, and they give him the update that Lake Town has been rebuilt. Bard's incredibly popular, and the Master of Lake Town succumbed to a terrible fate of dying in the wastes, having stolen all of the gold and succumbed to dragon sickness. We get that information at the very end of the story. Now, that wouldn't really function in my edit. You have the fate of Dale, and you see everyone proud and prosperous. You see King Dane, and everything's all good. And then you just have a random scene of Stephen Fry. And anyway, that wouldn't work because I've had to do a 60 years later anyway. So the Master of Lake Town would have been long dead by that point. So, and then I was trying to think of, well, where else narratively could I put this scene? And I just felt like the natural place for it was when Bard inquires, where is he? Where's the Master? And that's why that was in there. Kurt says maybe you could edit a shot of the Master's boat catching on fire and implying that they died from there. I could do. I always equate the Master of Lake Town and I was going to say Alfred in a way, but obviously Alfred survives for a lot of the Battle of the Five Armies, unfortunately. But let's say if you did have the Master of Lake Town and Alfred dying on that boat at that point in the story, it would be very similar to sort of the fate of Saruman and Grima Wormtongue, in that they do die, but at a different part in the story, a much later part in the story, but we're killing them off earlier when those characters have kind of served their narrative function, I guess, in the greater grand scheme of the story. I don't know if I'd like that, because part of me would be like, yeah, but that's not how the Master dies, and I'm trying to be as lore accurate as possible. So even just saying that, oh, the Master's escaped with all of the coin, that's technically true. Although, no, the Master of Lake Town hangs around for quite a bit of the actual book, doesn't he? He's still with them. He doesn't run off at that point. It's after all the events have happened. But I'm still somewhat staying true to that by having the Master of Lake Town escape with all of the gold. If you've read the book, you can infer that his fate would eventually be the same as what's in the book, even if it's happened at a slightly different time. Bath Time says, what's going on? I'm talking about The Hobbit, my dude, and the problems that I'm having with the edit so far. And I'm trying to think of, hopefully by the end of this stream, hopefully by the end of this conversation, I'll have arrived at a place of clarity in my mind, so I know how to move forward with it. Kurt the Gamer says, I don't mind Legolas being there because it's highly probable that he was there during the book's events. What I don't like is that they actually gave him a major role. Yeah, I agree. I agree. I also wanted to take the opportunity. I'm going to sneeze. Woo! I feel better now. Thank you. What I wanted to do with this edit as well, with this update, is to try and look back on the edit that I've already done and try and plug any plot holes that I can and really be critical of the edit that I've done and any kind of slips in the narrative and trying to fill those gaps as much as possible. An example of this would be, for example, I was chatting to JX and I was debating whether to have Bolg, sorry, I should say this, Azog's character. In my edit, I've renamed to Bolg. I'm actually just going to call him Azog, so it's a lot simpler. In my edit, I have Azog introduced in the film during the Out of the Frying Pan sequence where, the wargs show up, Azog's there, and that's where Thorin sees him for the first time in the film. Now, right before this, I have the Great Goblin say, send word to the Pale, or, send word to Azog, tell him I have found his prize. But I'm thinking, why would Azog be right there? He's right near the Misty Mountains. How far did that Goblin scribe have to travel? How quickly did that message get there? Because in between that, we only have the Riddles in the Dark sequence, and then right after that, Azog's there. So that he wouldn't have been that far. That message didn't have to travel that far to get Azog to get there. So I was thinking, well, should I remove Azog during Out of the Frying Pan sequence and just have him show up as that orc general at the end of the film? And I think M4's done a very similar thing, actually, where during Out of the Frying Pan, he just has like a bunch of random orcs, just nondescript goblins / orcs, no Azog or anything like that, no pale orc. And Azog only shows up at the very, very end of the film during the Battle of the Five Armies as this orc commander, as this big, scary orc commander that they've got to take down, which is very similar to the book, which is what M4 set out to do. Bolg in the book is just named as the chieftain of the orcs, of the goblins at the very end. And that's it. It's just, he hasn't been mentioned at any other point in the book, or maybe once actually in Bag End. I think he says, was it like Bolg, whose father you slew in Moria or something? I don't know. Azog's mentioned. I think Bolg may be mentioned very, very early on in the book. But anyway, Bolg really doesn't have a character in the book. He is just there as a evil centerpiece that is leading the Goblin army. And M4 achieved that. He just has Azog show up at the end. But again, when I was doing my approach to the edit, I felt that the central antagonist needs a bit of fleshing out. Even not much, it needs something. As a film, the Azog character needs to function as somewhat of an antagonist throughout the story. Not a major antagonist, but be present, be introduced, have some kind of motivation, so that when you get to the end and you have that final fight, it kind of means something. Not a whole lot, but a little bit. It's a little bit of character. It's a little bit of motivation. I have Azog. Obviously, I've renamed him to Bolg. He wants to avenge the death of his father. The dwarves killed his father a couple of 100 years ago. He hates the dwarves, and that's why he wants to kill Thorin and wipe out the line of Durin. It's a motivation. It's something. So I think narratively, in terms of a film, it makes sense to introduce Bolg's character during the Out of the Frying Pan sequence. Is it a stretch that the message from the Great Goblin got to him that quickly? Probably. I guess he just happened to be in the area, which is quite convenient. But this is what I mean. I'm really being critical of my edit and thinking, are there any scenes that I can remove entirely? Another one is the barrels out of Bond sequence, where barrels out of Bound. I've actually forgotten the name of that chapter, and I call myself a fan of The Hobbit. When they're escaping in the barrels, I've got rid of all of like the hijinks with the elves and the orcs, and all of that's gone. But when I watch edits where it's just the barrels coursing down the river, and there's no elves, there's no orcs at all, the scene just feels really quick. And I won't say anticlimactic, but it's just it's over before it's done. You just blink and we're on to the next scene. And I feel like that scene, because of how it's presented in the film, needs a little bit of staying power. So the way that I got around that was I do have the elves pursue them. I don't have the orcs, but I do have the elves pursuing them, Tariel and Legolas. And I wanted some of the arrows being fired, and I thought, right, well, I don't want to turn the elves into murderous assholes that are going to try and actually shoot the dwarves. Because then when we get to the end and we have Tariel saying, oh, we need to think of the dwarves and we need to go and save the dwarves, I'm like, bitch, you were just trying to kill them earlier in the film when they were escaping down the river. So I thought, right, how do I have the elves firing arrows at the dwarves, or at least at the barrels, and give a reason for that? And I added in this like really crummy ADR line that I think it was like a line that Tariel says or something, with a subtitle that says, sink the barrels. And I thought, well, the dwarves are escaping. The elves don't want them to escape. What can they do in this situation? They can't catch up with the barrels, so what are they going to do? They're going to pepper the barrels full of arrows to try and, put holes in them, so the barrels start filling up with water, and it's going to make the dwarves kind of run aground, or it's going to sink the barrels, or the dwarves are going to have to get to the shoreline, and then the elves can, reapprehend them from there. It's a bullshit plan, because the dwarves could still die, so the elves could still be murderous. And I just think the last time that we see Tariel is her firing arrows at the dwarves and their barrels. And then the next time we see her, she's like, oh, you think elvish lives are worth more than theirs? I'm like, well, how do we get between these two? So part of me is thinking, do I remove the elves chasing after them in the barrels, and I just kind of do what everyone else does and just have this really, really quick blink and you'll miss it escape out in the barrels? I don't know. To me, that moves way too quick. But what do you guys think? This is what I mean. I'm trying to fill all of the plot holes now. With me doing this update, this probably is going to be the last update that I do. This is probably going to be the last Hobbit edit that I do. I want to move on to other projects. I've got a lot of other ideas. I want to do stuff with The Lord of the Rings. Loads of other films on my mind that I want to try and do. And I want to give The Hobbit a break. But I do want to kind of put like the final nail in the coffin of these Hobbit edits with this updated version. So now's my time to make the changes, and I want to hear from you. What did you like about my edit, and what would you like to see changed in the final version? Because I am listening to you guys, and I want to make this, I want to make it a solid film for me to watch. I want a good version of The Hobbit to watch whenever I want to watch it. But also I want you guys to enjoy it too, and kind of get a good version to watch as well. Let's see. Kurt the Gamer says, maybe you go the whole hog and redub Oin and Gloin in the way that Tolkien actually pronounced them. Owen and Glowin. Ooh. That's I haven't even thought about doing that. Yeah, I'd have to do the same for Dane as well, wouldn't I? I'd have to say like Dying Ironfoot. Oh, I'm going to pitch that to JX if he hasn't seen that comment already. That could be interesting. Yeah. Of course, I'd have to do the same for the Lord of the Rings, though, as well, because, this is Gimli, son of Gloin, and Legolas of the Woodland Realm. I'd have to redub that as well. Bad Time says, wait for AI to catch up and work on something else. This sounds like an undoable time sink to me. I mean, it's not an undoable time sink. I think I'm conflicted. I really want to make one that's as accurate to the book as possible, removing all the bullshit and cutting the runtime down. But then the other part of me is wanting to just create the more, warts and all, as long as it flows. I've removed all of the worst offending scenes in the film, and there will still be scenes in there that I really dislike and I wish I could remove, but they kind of need to be there to facilitate certain things. Then, I'm okay with it. But it's really knowing when to take Bilbo out of the events. Like, do I keep the film sort of as it is and have Bilbo just around during the Battle of Dale, running up to save Thorin and kind of chipping in the fighting before he's knocked out? Or do I have it very similar to M4's edit, where Bilbo escapes, he puts on the ring during the actual Battle of Dale because battle's kicking off and he's in over his head and there's no way that he can possibly survive. So he gets himself out of the situation, he's knocked out, and then you pretty much just follow Fili, Kili, Thorin, Tariel, and Legolas for about 10 minutes of the ending. I don't know. Or do I just keep my edit as I've got it with Dwalin up there as well, even though he kind of disappears into the ether and we don't see him? Kurt says, I don't find that a stretch. Maybe Bolg has just been visiting the Misty Mountains a day or so ago, so he was near enough to the mountains that they were able to summon him. Yeah, and JX, I think, said that, you know, in the book, the orcs that are there on the wargs are getting ready to do a night raid on the woodsman. So I guess maybe the Great Goblin was like, hey, Bolg, I've got this night raid coming up. I'm going to use a couple of my guys. Do you mind if you come down and like help as well? It's going to be this big raid on the woodsman. There's going to be like oodles of like treasure and stuff that you can steal. And yeah, so maybe he was in the area. It's as long as it's not a stretch, it just did occur to me when I was kind of looking back at my edit a little bit. Kurt says, plus I feel that you kind of have to set up the army of orcs at the end in some way and show that they were connected to the earlier attack. Otherwise, it would feel like a series of random events. Yeah, I totally agree. And some edits do that. It is very similar to the book in how it's just like, oh, and now there's an army of orcs here that also want the riches in the mountain. And it's like, oh, okay. But filmically, you kind of want more than that, I think. And I think that's probably one of the reasons in Fellowship of the Ring why Peter Jackson added the character of Lurtz. Because Lurtz isn't in the book. It's just an army of like orcs or orcs or whatever that go there. We don't even see really the end battle at Amonhen. It's all told in hindsight. As I mentioned earlier, they just find the body of Boromir surrounded by a lot of dead orcs. And he's been peppered full of arrows. And that's it. We don't see like any big ending battle. So I love that the Fellowship of the Ring shows that. It's done in a very, very dramatic and emotional way. And also on top of that, you need some kind of antagonist. Like you couldn't just have like hordes of orcs. Like that would lack impact. So they create the boss orc, the head honcho, Lurtz, which makes Boromir's death more impactful. And especially the fight right after that, where Aragorn comes in to assist and has that really awesome, like urgent and violent visceral attack. You know, it feels so realistic, like they're headbutting each other and they're kicking each other. It feels like an actual proper fight. Love that. And that character's created out of whole cloth. You need that big baddie orc kind of character who is set up throughout the film. Now, does Lurtz have a massive motivation? No. He's created by dark magic, by Saruman, that he's created with the sole purpose of just killing anything in sight. You know, killing men, killing elves, killing dwarves, everything, and just bringing the halflings back. That is it. That is his motivation. But how fucking cool is Lurtz in that movie, right? He's really, really cool. So why not set up Bolg earlier in the film, give him a backstory that is accurate to his character from the book, and just making use of the Azog footage that you've got. So, yeah. Another scene that I've kept in my original edit, and it's really to facilitate the Gundabad army, really, is the scene of Azog going to Dol Guldur and conversing with the necromancer. So it sets up that, you know, he's in league, the orcs are in league with the necromancer, so it brings in that sort of greater Lord of the Rings world-ending subplot of the necromancer. He tells Azog, you know, you will lead my armies. I did see a comment somewhere which did make me almost think about removing that scene entirely, and one of the comments was the fact that Azog quite openly backchats Sauron in that moment. Now, granted, I have changed the subtitle in my edit, but he pretty much stands toe-to-toe and is sort of arguing with Sauron. Sauron should be like this eldritch god, like this larger-than-life demonic spirit that can kill you with a single thought and can get inside your mind and turn you mad. And this is essentially to Sauron, this is a nothing. This is a pitiful fucking nothing orc. Yes, he's a general. Yes, he's a leader of orcs, but he's an orc. He is a million miles below what Sauron is. If an orc started backchatting Sauron would kill that motherfucker instantly, just to set an example. So I was thinking about maybe removing that scene, but again, it's kind of necessary because it sets Bolg up as a character. And by Bolg, I mean I've changed his name to the Bodyguard, the second in line with Azog, because he's going to need to be there later on for Legolas to fight. And it sets up that he's going to go up to Gundabad and assemble the army. So yeah, I was tempted to remove that scene, but then I thought, oh, narratively, it probably kind of needs to be there in the edit to get the army down there and to set up the bodyguard character so that Legolas has someone to fight, so that Legolas can throw the sword back to Thorin, and it all keeps coming back to that Orcris problem at Ravenhill. But you got to do what you got to do, haven't you? Kurt says, like Gandalf said, this was all destiny. He didn't succeed on pure luck. In the same way, everything played out the way it did because it was meant to happen. That's why Bolg was in close range. Yeah, 100%. Speaking of that, actually, this is a really great jumping off point. And I think someone mentioned AI earlier, like AI voices. There's one line that I'd love to add in for Gandalf, and it's at the very end. And the absence of this line changes a lot, actually, from the book. So it's in Bilbo's goodbye with Gandalf at the very end of the film. And Gandalf says to Bilbo, "You don't really suppose, do you, that all of your adventures and escapes were managed by mere luck?" In the book, there's a little bit extra to that line. And it's, you don't suppose that all of your adventures and escapes were managed by mere luck, just for your sole benefit. And that line is integral, because it means that all of these, because the word luck and chance is mentioned so much throughout The Hobbit, and it's a key part of the story, and you think that, oh, well, that was lucky. Oh, it's a children's adventure. Oh, then all of a sudden he found this magical piece of equipment that will all of a sudden magically come in handy later on. Oh, that was a coincidence. Moon runes. Oh, it just so happens that the same moon shines upon us tonight. Oh, well, that's a cracking bit of luck, isn't it? When you get that line at the very end, you don't suppose that all of these events happen just for your sole benefit. It's not for your sole benefit. It's for the greater benefit of the world. And when we get the Silmarillion, we get more context to this. But as it stands, that's, it's kind of like the idea of God's plan, Eru's plan. Everything is by his design. Everything is the sum of his thoughts. And all of these events that play out are leading to a certain destination point. And that's, I'm not a believer. That's the way that Tolkien wrote it. And that's, what I kind of think. You lose that aspect from it by removing that line, I think. So I'd quite like to add that line back in if I can. You still have the line of Gandalf saying, "You don't really suppose, do you, that all of your adventures and escapes were managed by mere luck?" I can then cut to a reaction of Bilbo and then have that AI line just for your sole benefit and hopefully make the line flow more. I'd quite like to get that in there if I can in this update. Provided that the AI works and provided that it sounds good. If it sounds naff and it doesn't flow, then I won't use it and I'll just keep it as it is. But I do think that one line changes everything. It's kind of like what the whole crux of the story is. Bathtime says, maybe make a dream edit on paper and wait for the tech to catch up then. If you love doing these things, then do what you love. You can do something equally as enjoyable and constructive. Do that. I agree, man. I agree. And don't get me wrong, like I love just fan editing. I don't get much time to do it now, unfortunately, with other commitments and other pursuits that I'm trying to devote time to. But there's nothing better than after I've had like a really long day at work, just getting in and just getting into the editing suite and just sort of, I won't say turning my mind off, but it's kind of like my happy place. Like I'm editing. It's creative. It's The Hobbit. It's Middle-earth shit. It's my favorite book of all time, and just seeing it get ever closer to that final product just fills me with like so much joy. So I love doing it when I get the chance to do it. But sometimes you just hit these snafus, and JX probably hates the fact that I blow his phone up so much with like 2 minute long, 3 minute long voice notes, sometimes longer. And I'm just cooking. I'm just like throwing ideas out there. I'm like, what if I edit this way? Well, if I edit this way, then this means this happens, and then this is going to lead to this. But no, what if I did it this? Jay's probably fucking hates me for that. But I really appreciate that he's there, and I like that he's on the same wavelength with me, and him being a fan editor as well. It's nice that we have that connection over that thing. So yeah, I just need to pick a lane. Essentially, I need to pick a lane. And I just need to stick to it, because then I can get this project done in somewhat of a timely fashion. I really want to try and get this edit done for this year. I don't want to spend any longer on it, and I certainly don't want to spend another 8 years on it. I think the original edit I did took 8 years because I was just kind of discovering it. And things were advancing, and I was changing to different editing softwares and whatnot. But now I kind of have a blueprint of what I did originally, and now I'm thinking, do I just stick to that blueprint verbatim, just with better quality footage, or do I use this chance now to make some tweaks? And of course, I'm going to make some tweaks here and there. Some of the rotoscoping that didn't work, I'm going to change. I now have AI, so I could add some extra voices in there, some extra lines of dialogue that were missing, and which I wish I could have put in the original version. But I'm just thinking, do I keep it where you've got sort of like 2.5 hour chunks that you can watch at your leisure, or do I try and cut it down considerably from what I did, possibly jeopardizing the vision that I had for my original edit and maybe making it slightly more run-of-the-mill in terms of all the other fan edits out there, but making it a more sort of like ergonomic runtime and much more watchable in a 4 hour and 10 runtime span? I don't know. So that's kind of where I'm at. I'm at Ravenhill at the moment, and I'm struggling. That being said, other projects, once this is done, I've got, as I mentioned, I've got loads of ideas. I've got a really cool idea for the Lord of the Rings. Now, editing those films feels sacrilegious to me because I absolutely adore those films, but having worked on this Hobbit edit and reading the book so many times, so many times, the current state of my Hobbit book... Look at this shit. This was my original Hobbit book that I had when I was a pup. I think I got this sort of around, oh God, I don't know, maybe around the time that Fellowship or Two Towers came out. I've showed this off before, and it was already beat up then. The front cover's unfortunately fallen off. And this is not me treating the book like shit. This is just a very, very well-loved book. But since then, I still actually haven't unwrapped it yet. I haven't read it. I've got the facsimile edition, which I do want to go through at some point. And then I did buy this this box set. I forgot what year this came out, which contains the individual volumes, because I just wanted another reading copy of The Hobbit. So yeah, but I want to go into Lord of the Rings. You know, I've read that book a whole bunch of times since then as well, and I probably will read it a bunch more as well, because I'm much more knowledgeable on The Hobbit as a book than I am The Lord of the Rings. The Lord of the Rings so dense, there's so many moving parts in it and information and whatnot, but I do have a plan for that, and I really want to have a crack at The Lord of the Rings, and I do actually have a project file for it, although I probably will start it from scratch again, and I am trying to nudge that more to book accuracy as well if I can. So watch this space. Hopefully, when I can get this Hobbit edit done and it's out there and it's finished, I'll be moving on to Lord of the Rings probably after that point. Bathtime says, I've always had a personal theory that Sauron making the ring was some way of removing Melkor's corruption from himself. Or maybe sort of like leaving his own mark, maybe. I mean, I've got the volume 10 right there of the history of Middle Earth, and volume 10 is called Morgoth's Ring, and Morgoth's Ring is really, Ea is the earth. It's the evil that he poured into and the corruption that he placed into the world, which there's mixed messages. Sometimes Tolkien says that the corruption will never be gone. It will always be present in the world. But then you have other accounts like the Dagor Dagorath, where evil will, the Ragnarok at the end of the world, at Judgment Day, evil will finally be overthrown. And essentially we'll have the Book of Revelation after that point. The second music of the Ainur. JX says Saga Edit. Yeah, the Saga Edit is another project. Me and JX want to do Star Wars episodes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 in order to make the continuity between them a lot better. there's a lot of continuity issues with George Lucas's saga, but we love it. We love it still, but we do have plans to kind of nudge that in the right direction if we can. Kurt says, I got the facsimile last year. I'm dying to read it, man. I'm going to go... I probably will read it from the beginning, but I can't wait to get stuck into Riddles in the Dark, because I'm vaguely aware of what was changed and what was sort of like added in the revised version, but I've never actually read the original version, so I'm really looking forward to it when I get around to it. On top of that, JX, I've got them right there. Beowulf, Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, and The Fall of Arthur. 3 amazing gifts that JX got me for my birthday, which he really didn't have to do. But I love you for it, man. Thank you for getting me them. They're on the back burner too. I need to get those read. A lot of Tolkien stuff. And I wouldn't have it any other way. Bathtime says if you've got Spotify Premium or access to it, you got the Andy Serkis audiobooks and he's absolutely incredible. I do have Spotify Premium. I did not know that was on Spotify. I thought that was maybe only on Audible. So that is very interesting. I did mention to JX earlier today, I'm looking for maybe some audiobooks to get into. Maybe I'll jump back into The Hobbit again. Kurt says the revised edition is definitely the better version of the book, but the original is still excellent. Yeah, I just kind of want to read it as just so I've got the knowledge of both versions, really. The revised version is the only one that I've known. Yeah, I'm with you there, Kurt. The best is Blue Fax. Every time I listen to that audiobook, you best believe I'm going for Blue Fax. Yeah, he hasn't done the Silmarillion yet, and from what I heard, he didn't express interest in doing that. He was just like, good luck to anyone who can do the Silmarillion. I remember over lockdown, I really got into those audiobooks, and I listened to... There's an audiobook version of the Silmarillion, just like the normal standard audiobook version, and then I listened to Blue Fax's Hobbit, and then I listened to Phil Dragash's Lord of the Rings, which is phenomenal. And I was like, I'd really like to have a crack at doing the Silmarillion, but I don't know whether I'll ever get around to that. I think it was a cool idea at the time. I was thinking of all the different music from different film soundtracks I could use for certain chapters, but I was thinking the sheer amount of characters that you've got that you'd have to get like voice actors for. And I guess now you could probably use AI on some of those voices, but AI doesn't always have that same delivery and that same passion in the lines that you can only get from that human voice. So yeah, that's going to be a mammoth project for anyone who wants to take it on. I mean, I'm not ruling it out, but I don't think it will see the light of day in my lifetime, for me making it at least. But I did have ideas of what I'd like to do for it. I'm not a voice actor, though. That's the issue. I am not a voice actor by any stretch of the imagination. I don't have the voice for it. I don't have the acting chops for it. I just don't think I have the strength. So, yeah, who knows? I was thinking about maybe taking the original audiobook as it stands, either the Andy Serkis one or the original one, and just adding music to it, adding sound effects to it to make it slightly more theatrical. But even then, I think someone could probably do, a much better job of it than I could, to be honest. Oh, Bathtime says, I like Christopher Lee's Children of Hurin. Yes, that's a great shout, actually. Yes, I think that, yeah, Rob Inglis is cool too. Wait, which is he the guy that did the summer? Which is the one that I've listened to? Let me see if I've still got it on my phone. I actually can't even still. I can't remember if I've still got Audible on here. Oh, I have. Which is the version of the Silmarillion I always listen to? Martin Shaw. Martin Shaw's Silmarillion is the one that I always listen to. There's probably a lot more. I know there's the Andy Serkis one, but I've only ever listened to Martin Shaw's one. Kurt says I can do a wide range of voices, but I'm unlikely to record the Silmarillion as I only record public domain books. That's fair enough. Yeah. And also as well, like if I did outsource it, if I did get a bunch of voice actors to do all the individual speaking roles, I think when I was listening to it last time, I was kind of making a note of all the different speaking parts of the Silmarillion. And I think it was something like 39 to 40 individual characters that get lines in that book. If you outsource that to 40 different actors, that's a lot of money to pay everyone as well, which I don't possess, to give them a fair wage for their works. Not to mention that you'd have to make sure that every single actor had a good microphone, and then you'd have to, in editing, make it all sound consistent. If one person, for example, had like a really clean, crisp mic, another one had like a very bassy radio voice mic, and then someone just records it on like a fucking webcam microphone or a Blue Snowball microphone, there's going to be some discrepancy there between the different quality of the voices. So I think it would just be completely unwieldy to manage something like that. I think Bath Time says, yeah, Bath Time says the Circus Silmarillion is my favorite by a country mile. I actually haven't listened to that version yet. I think I watched a review on it saying that his pronunciation is inconsistent with a few things. To be fair, that's probably also the case with Martin Shaw's one as well. So, yeah, I might give that a listen, actually. I might start with his version of The Hobbit. That I remember, actually, I think when he did the charity stream, I think it was over lockdown, wasn't it? Andy Serkis did like a completely unabridged 10 and a bit hour live stream of him just reading The Hobbit. And everyone tuned in for Riddles in the Dark. I remember for the longest time thinking, I wonder, now that we actually have the lines of him reading the Riddles in the Dark chapter in its entirety, is there any way to make use of that extra audio and do like a more complete version of that in the film? Now, we don't have the extra footage for it. AI would only get you so far, and I think it would look kind of crummy. And to be fair, that scene is already very, very well adapted as far as I'm concerned. So maybe one day when AI catches up and we can create scenes out of whole cloth that look really super convincing, someone will probably take that extra audio from the audiobook of Riddles in the Dark, and we can get a full, complete version of that, which would be very interesting. I think my biggest problem with my edit of The Hobbit, and this is I'm kind of blaming the films here, not so much like my editing capabilities, but just what I have to work with. It's the fact that the film kind of has 2/3 acts. I think, and what I mean by that is that you have your triumphant moment of Thorin charging out of Erebor with all of the dwarves, and they're all there and they're turning the tide of the battle. I think it was a huge mistake to then take Thorin, Fili, and Kili to Ravenhill, a completely different, isolated location, away from everything else that's happening. Because we abandon all of the other dwarves, we abandon Dane, we abandon everything else that's going on, and focus on this really small skirmish up here with like a different set of occurrences, a different set of events, and different set of stakes up here. I think if we could have just had what my dream ending of The Hobbit would be, is to have Thorin charge out of Erebor and just keep it there, keep it in that central area. Have Azog witness this, or Bolg, I guess. Have Azog witness this and be like, kind of like Kylo Ren in The Last Jedi, where he's like, bring me down to him. And he's like, right, I'll do it myself. And you have Azog enter the battlefield there. You have Thorin. And, oh, this would have been perfect. Oh, guys, okay, I'm cooking. You have Thorin and Azog go toe-to-toe in that fray. Like, the orcs kind of clear a path for them and let them fight it out. And it's this massive skirmish. And it's echoing back to that flashback that we saw at Azan-ul-Bazar. And, you know, you could even use the same music and it's just as intense. It's like these two people, you know, these two mortal enemies are fighting in the same kind of situation again. And it's great. And then you could have Thorin get stabbed. And it could actually be like the moment in The Return of the King where Theoden is taken down by the Witch King. And then it cuts to that reaction shot that looks like it's in a different shutter speed where Eowyn looks on in horror. You have that, but you have Fili and Kili looking on in horror as Thorin is mortally wounded by Azog in that moment. You then have them join the fight, and you have them try and do something, anything, kind of like where Merry and Pippin charge in to try and do anything to save Boromir, but quickly get apprehended. You have like a small fight with them with shield and body and whatnot, and you have Azog carve them down as well. And right in that moment, you have Azog, you know, he stands over Thorin with his mace or whatever he has to do the killing blow. And that's when he looks up and he hears the roar. And you have Beorn come down and he's charging through the ranks and he's charging towards him. And you have the eagles fly. Oh, God, that would have been perfect. You have everything you need and you just keep it in that location. All of your characters are in the same locale. You're not splitting everyone apart and you don't have what I always call the second, third act. The Last Jedi has a second, third act. You have your third act at the throne room sequence with Snoke, and then right after that, you have your second, third act with the fucking crate. I hate it. I hate that films tend to do this now. Oh, guys, the film that I just envisioned in my head just filled me with so much joy, and I wish we could have that version of the film. Unfortunately, we've got Ravenhill, and unfortunately, we've got a Tariel and a Legolas that we've got to use. and we've got to have Legolas jumping off a tower and landing on a troll and throwing a sword up a waterfall. I hate it, guys. I hate it, but it's kind of needed to allow the film to flow with the continuity. I could just have Bilbo get knocked out. I could do that. And I have done that. But it ain't a good movie going experience. Especially, here's the thing: if you don't set up Bolg earlier on the film, if you don't flesh out that character, and you literally just have him be this nondescript random orc guy that shows up at the end to fight the good guys, yeah, cut into black and fading in and having Thorin kill him off screen, maybe that might even work. But to me, that's not really fulfilling as a moviegoer. You need your bad guy to have some kind of motivation, and the ramifications of that is that it beefs up Bolg's character, it beefs up the rivalry between Thorin, and you need to see that for the ending. So you have to make some compromises, unfortunately. It's like when I tried to take a stab at fan editing the Star Wars sequel trilogy, which, who knows, maybe at some point I might give another go. Hopefully when AI catches up and I can basically just remake all the films from scratch. But guys, I had some ideas for that sequel trilogy. I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. I was like, I want to do all of these things with the film, but you're so unfortunately beholden to what you have to work with that there just comes a point where if you can't do what you want to do with it, then you just kind of have to walk away from it. And that's what I ended up doing from the sequel trilogy. The sequel trilogy, I've like walked away from and come back and walked away from and come back like multiple times, but I don't know. It was not a fun time trying to edit those films. It's that I will say the Hobbit films much fucking better than the Star Wars sequel trilogy. Like there's good stuff in the Hobbit films. You just got to kind of cut around it. Kurt says you could put we has only 6 instead. We has only 9, but you'd have to edit out some of his teeth too. Yeah, dude, every time I read that in the book, it kills me in the movie knowing that he says we only have 9. That was probably an oversight from them when they made the Lord of the Rings film, and that was just the character model they had. So for continuity purposes, they have him say we only have 9. The thought has occurred to me, I have thought, can I get rid of 3 of his teeth? I don't know how easy that would be. That seems like in the Lord of the Rings with him talking, that would be an absolute fucking nightmare. And also you got to think about the mouth movement as well. It's not too bad if you use like ADR dialogue or something like that, or if the character's got like a lot of facial hair or you don't see the mouth moving all that much, you can kind of have, or if they're from a distance, you can have them say whatever you want to, because you're not really going to be looking at that mouth movement. It's going to be very, very difficult to see on a screen. But he is in close up, he's like, we have only 9. And he very quite clearly says, 9. We have only 6. Like it's not going to work. I wish I could. Maybe I could cut to like a different reaction shot of Bilbo. But yeah, I dislike that I can't change that. I wish I could. I will look into it. As I quote from Batman Begins, I'll look into it to see if I can, but I don't think it's going to be doable. It could probably be doable for The Hobbit because it's quite dark and, he's in the Lonely Mountain and we don't get any other scenes of Gollum after that. But The Lord of the Rings, he's in it a lot more. And that would be very difficult to do, I think. Not ruling it out, but don't get your hopes up. Bath Time says, yeah, I felt the charge was cool, but it felt like it should have been like Frodo, Luke Skywalker going to fight the personal battle and the other fighting the war. Yeah, maybe. And then Kurt says, I remember in the theater at the same time saying the line along with him because I knew the line from the book and then being like, wait, what? Yeah, that's if you have that intimate knowledge of the book and you just know it like the back of your hand when they change something, which seems so small, and it is small. Like, the fact that, he has 6 teeth in the book, but he has 9 in the movie. Does it change the story? No. Does it really change anything you think about the character? No. But it's like, but if it's there, just do it. I think, as I mentioned, like I think the reason that they felt like they had to change it for the movie it was just an oversight when they created the character in the Lord of the Rings movie and they had their design. They probably gave him 9 teeth. They probably thought that it looked, good enough. Someone probably didn't do their homework and go and read The Hobbit before and go, actually, he has 6 here, so we should give him 6 teeth. They probably didn't do that. And they gave him 9. And then when they got to the Hobbit film, they were like, shit, well, we got to keep it in line with that, haven't we? So, because otherwise, if they said we only has 6, you're then going to have people going and pausing frames of the Lord of the Rings and go, well, actually, if you pause this frame, you can see quite clearly that he has 9 teeth. And yeah, the lesser of 2 evils, I suppose. Battime says, I remember getting worried in Fellowship that when Bilbo disappeared at the party tree, Gandalf didn't make a puff of smoke, little details that stick in your mind. That could actually probably be doable now with After Effects. There could be a way to have Bilbo disappear in a puff of smoke. Yeah, because it happens very, very quickly, and then Gandalf uses some of his magic to create a puff of smoke in order to completely not fuck the minds of every hobbit there. And they think, it's Gandalf just playing one of his practical jokes. Whereas deep down, Gandalf's like, something's amiss. I didn't do that. Yeah. And maybe that is something I could add into a Lord of the Rings edit. How that being said, if all of a sudden there's like a puff of smoke, I don't think there's enough grounds there with the footage that I have in the movie to show that Gandalf was the one who did that and the reason why Gandalf did that. I think in the book you can get away with that. I think visually with what I have to work with, I don't think I'd be able to do that, unfortunately. Kurt says, yeah, I think they didn't want to bother with an explanation that Gandalf was on it with him. Yeah, and I think it still works for the movie, and they know that Bilbo's kind of kooky and and queer, and I'm saying queer in the archaic way of saying queer, so don't at me. But Bilbo's unusual, and he's strange, and he's so this just kind of adds to Bilbo's weirdness, I suppose. But I do like that there is that explanation in the book, definitely. There's other things that as well that I'd quite like to change with The Lord of the Rings, and I don't want to give everything away now because, I'd rather wait until I've got my edit done and get it out there for people to see. Certain things, how Caradhras is just kind of like a force of nature, and Caradhras is kind of ambiguous itself in the movie in that, is it possessed by Melkor? Because Melkor kind of delved in things of fire and grinding ice and harsh landscapes. Is it a carryover from the evil that Melkor put into the world? Is it just a personification of nature itself, sort of similar to the stone giants as well? I was going to bring that up as well. I've removed the stone giants now out of my edit, but part of me still wants to show them just in the very, very far distance in the lightning flashes. I just won't have that elaborate action set piece, that cartoony action set piece of the stone giants. I don't actually even mind that scene necessarily in the movie. I think it's a visual spectacle. I do think it is incredibly over the top. And to be fair, stone giants of that magnitude and that, immensity probably does break the law and does break the world, because you could probably think, well, why wouldn't Sauron get an army of these fuckers? And he instantly wins, these Shadow of the Colossi, that could just show up. So I have removed them, and the scene does play just fine. They're traversing over like a perilous mountain in the Misty Mountains. Bilbo slips, and Thorin has to come down and save him. It's fine. You don't need the stone giants in there. But they are mentioned in the book, and they're kind of ambiguous in the book as to whether they are actually real or not. Giants are mentioned elsewhere, so stone giants could be a subspecies of giants. That's entirely a possibility, but I quite like that it's almost a personification of the actual surroundings. And also from Bilbo's perspective, the unreliable narrator and him being but a humble hobbit, he's probably seeing these terrifying things in the lightning flashes that aren't there. And I'd quite like to do that with Caradhras if possible. So not having Saruman chanting a spell to bring down the mountain, I think that's cool. I don't have a problem with it in the Lord of the Rings film, but if I am editing the Lord of the Rings films with the intention of it being closer to the book as much as possible, then I probably would remove it. I might even still have Legolas say something like, there is a fell voice on the air, but I'd remove it being Christopher Lee's voice, and I'd have it be this kind of shrill, phantom-like wind, icy voice on the air. Maybe is it actually a voice? Is it just the sound of the wind that sounds like it's laughing at them? And something like that, keeping it intentionally vague, I think could be quite cool and interesting to work with, and have it just be they're fighting the elements, essentially. Let's read a few more. Yeah, no, I totally agree with you here. It's less than egregious a change than what they did to my lad Denethor. Yeah. With an edit, I need to do something with Denethor. There's elements there that are present for already in the film that we get. Yes, he is vilified a lot more than he is in the book, but there are still elements to it. Like, I think he still sends. This is what I mean. I'm going to need to read the book again in preparation for this edit much later down the line, but I think he still does kind of go mad and sort of send Faramir out to his death. I think he still does that in the book, if I remember rightly. So, like, all of that checks out. There's him communicating with Sauron via the Palantir, which is referenced in the extended edition, but very, very subtly. But I guess it is referenced in some way. It's just really just like the vilification, the vilifying of him. So I probably have to remove a lot of that and downplay some of it too. Bath Time says, you keeping the wings? I'd love to know how long that conversation went on for. You keeping the wings? The wings? You keeping the wings? What are we talking about with the wings there? Am I missing something? Just let me know what you mean by that. Bath Time says, yes, the stone giants are too in focus and real instead of it could be two things fighting the distance. That's what I want to do. Now, I might have to outsource that to some kind of visual effects company, because the camera sort of pans round the corner of the mountain, and there are various sort of lightning flashes that light up the landscape and the horizon around. And my intention is to take some of the footage of the stone giants, sort of crop around them or do a rotor around them, really, really, really shrink them down. Because if you think about it, if we can see them on the horizon and they're like a certain size, what size would they be in person? They'd be even bigger than the ones presented in the movie. So I might have to kind of fuck with the scale a little bit, because if I really shrink them down, then they're going to look like little diddy men on the mountain, and they'll lack the visual impact of being giant. But if I blow them up too much and put them on the horizon, then you've got to think about scale-wise. If you got that close to them, you'd be like, holy fucking shit. It's like the Burj Khalifa or whatever. Like, what the fuck? So, yeah. Kurt says, in the Hobbit video game, which was my introduction to Tolkien as a kid, you have to find firewood at one point and dodge the stone giants' boulders. Could you try and maybe do a 6-movie structure, kind of like how the Lord of the Rings books are split into 6 parts? I did wonder this, actually, and I think there is quite an old fan edit now that did split them into 6 parts. Now, I want to kind of explain what my idea is for the structure, but I don't want to give too much away, but because I'd rather get my edit done first and then get it out there for people to see. I don't know if I could split it into 6, and here's the reason why. There is an edit that has done that, by the way, that has split it into 6. I don't know how easy it is to find, but if you type in Lord of the Rings fan edits, part 1, part 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, like, you'll find them out there. Now, what they've done with their edit is they've kept the structure pretty much exactly the same as it is in the book. So when you get to 2 Towers, they have all of the Pippin stuff pretty much unbroken. Then you have or vice versa. Then you have all of the Aragorn stuff pretty much unbroken. And then you have all of the Frodo stuff. Now, the issue is with that is that there's kind of awkward cuts in that. Imagine taking every single Treebeard scene from the film and mashing it all into one uncut scene. There's no sense of passage of time. There's going to be awkward cuts. There's going to be awkward cuts from like day to night time. And personally, I don't think that works. Yes, it is true to the structure of the book, but I think in terms of a film, I think that's weird. And not to mention pacing as well. So as it is, I can't really structure it in that 6-part way. not to mention structure it in a 6-part way that stays true to the contents of each of those parts from the book. So what my intention is to try and match it in chronological order of the events. Now, problems already arise from the Fellowship of the Ring with this. There is a way that I can add like a little title card in for that 17 years later when Gandalf goes off on his hunt for Gollum. There is a way that I can do that. I'm thinking about maybe digitally de-aging Sam. To be fair, I don't even think Merry and Pippin should be alive at that point, or if they are, they should be like 8 years old. They should be like really, really young because of that 17 years later gap. So unfortunately, it might mean removing things like Merry and Pippin from the party scene. Unfortunately, it is a great introduction to their character, but narratively, they would be very, very exceptionally young hobbits. I'm thinking about digitally de-aging Sam, keeping Frodo the same because he's in possession of the ring and it delays old age. So that when we do the 17 years later time jump, we then have normal Sam. I've de-aged him before that point. We have him regular Sam after that. And I can kind of keep Frodo the same as well because he's in possession of the ring and he wouldn't have aged. That's my kind of way around that a little bit. But it does mean getting rid of certain things like Merry and Pippin letting the firework off at the party. Maybe I can still keep the firework in there in some way and just have Gandalf setting it off like he does in the book. Yeah, and then staying as chronological as possible. Now, the issue with that is, of course, Gandalf rides off to Orthanc, to Saruman. Right around this point in the movie, you have Frodo and Sam already leaving the Shire. Now, they don't leave the Shire, I don't think, until Gandalf has already escaped from Orthanc at that point. So, again, I'd have to mash all of the Gandalf-Orthanc scenes together in one unbroken cut and then try and have Frodo and Sam go off on their journey after that. Of course, you miss out on a great introduction of Sam where he's eavesdropping, I've thought of a better use for you. And he sets him out on the journey. I'd probably have to remove that too because narratively, they stay in the Shire for a very long time. I think they don't leave until the September, isn't it? Like a year later or something. So, yeah, I don't know. I want to keep it as chronological as possible, but then there are certain elements to the Fellowship of the Ring where I'm like, maybe there are some bits where I can do that more effectively than others because I don't want to jeopardize the film too much, but I want to try and edit it as sequential as possible. It would also mean getting rid of certain things like Osgiliath, but now we've got AI. That should actually be a lot more manageable to do. Yeah, so those are kind of my ideas of what I do for the Lord of the Rings edit. I'd also have Glamdring glowing blue to sort of match my version of the Hobbit edit. So that's more consistent that way. So yeah, they're kind of ideas that I'm kicking around for an eventual Lord of the Rings edit. Removing the elves from Helm's Deep as well. Which unfortunately does mean removing a lot of great character moments of Gimli and Legolas at Helm's Deep, but it is what it is. Let's see. There's a few more comments here. Where did I get up to? Sorry. Here we go. Bathtime says people who only see the films never make the connection between Theoden and Denethor. Yeah, like Merry and Pippin and Theoden and Denethor are beautiful kind of. Well, Merry and Pippin aren't really mirror images of each other. I guess they are in a way. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, Merry and Pippin are mirror images of each other. You have both of them dividing, and then one supports Rohan, and a Hobbit has to get stuck in the fighting, and Pippin does the same for the faction of Gondor, which is great, and I love that kind of split with those two. Whereas Theoden and Denethor is almost like a mirror of what Theoden could have become had he just succumbed to grief and futility and not stepped up. I don't really think in the book it's an actual possession from Saruman. They went with a more literal sense in the movies. It's more of that, through poisonous words and actions, he's just kind of been wearied and beat down, and he's just kind of lost all sense of direction and hope at this point, which I actually think is a lot better. And I kind of wish they'd have done that in the movie because it just raises so many questions. Like, does Saruman have to be kind of connected all of the time in order to possess Theoden? Is he possessing him sort of half the time, some of the time? Like, how much power does this exert on Saruman? What if he needs to be inspecting the orc pits? Like, what? It's awkward. Bathtime says maybe you can try, I don't know if it will work, having their sons dying in contrasting scenes. Well, if you're referring to Denethor and Theoden, yeah. So if you look at the Tale of Years at the back of the book, I actually do think that Theodred dies right around the time, it's the Fords of Isen, isn't it? And I think he actually dies right around the time that Boromir does. Or actually, no, I think actually he dies when the Fellowship get to Parth Galen, when they pull up in the boats. I think it's there. It's somewhere around that kind of time. It's either around the time that Boromir dies, or it's right before Boromir dies. And the thing is as well, like, I'm going to have to remove so many great scenes. And this is the dilemma that I have. Bernard Hill, rest in peace. Phenomenal fucking actor. One of the best pieces of acting in The Lord of the Rings is him in front of the funeral mound with the symbol Muna, and he breaks down and says, "No parent should have to bury their child." I'm well, even just talking about it now, I'm like welling up. That acting is just chef's kiss. It's perfect, and it's delivered so well. But I wouldn't be able to have that in my edit. And the reason for that is if I'm staying true to the lore, when Theodred fell, he wasn't alive. There's no moment where Éomer finds his body and brings him back and, he's still alive and all of that. No, he died at the Fords of Isen during that battle, and his men, the survivors, buried him in like a mound, like a funeral mound where his body lay. So Theodred is already dead at this point, and he's already buried. His body is not brought back to Edoras to be buried in the funeral, to be buried in the mounds. So I would have to get rid of that scene. And it kills me that I have to get rid of that scene. So this is the interesting dilemma with the Hobbit films, in that when eventually I get my edit in place for the Hobbit and it's out there and it's in the best quality possible, no joke, that will probably be the version of the Hobbit that I will watch for the rest of my life if I ever watch it again. The Lord of the Rings, I want to do this edit to just sort of go, well, I've done the Hobbit as a book accurate thing. I'm going to try and do the Lord of the Rings as a book accurate thing. And there are some changes that are justified and can be made, definitely. But inherently, those films are still great and still work as films. And I probably will always watch those versions for the complete version. This is more of an experiment, I guess, the Lord of the Rings would be. Whereas the Hobbit is that I genuinely care about these films. And like, I just want a version that's somewhat closer to the books and just raises the bar a little bit. It's never going to be comparable to the Lord of the Rings ever. It's just not, fundamentally, from the footage that I have to work with and the way it was shot and the way it looks, actors and whatever CGI in there. There's only so much I can do, but I just want to raise it to a slightly better level, in my opinion, at least. Some people watch my edit and go, "This is a piece of shit. I'm going to watch Unexpected Journey, Desolation of Smaug, Battle of the Five Armies," and I'd be like, "Go right ahead. I'm going to watch this version." Oh, bath time meant about wings with the Balrogs. Interesting. I guess I could probably mask it out with more fire or more smoke in the scene. It's doable. I could get rid of it, and I could just have the smoke covering what the wings in the film, because it mentions that the smoke that erupted from him stretched out like two vast wings or something like that, doesn't it? That stretched from either side of the chasm. Tradeable Jack says, "Good afternoon." Do you mean to wish me a good afternoon, or do you mean this good afternoon whether I want it or not? Welcome. Kurt the Gamer says, "I almost feel like the new Gollum movie is going to retcon the timeline back to being more book accurate anyway, so maybe we just go with Frodo, Sam, Merry, and Pippin aged really well." Here's the thing, that movie's been delayed by another year. I ain't gonna spread doom and dark thoughts. Ian McKellen's getting very old. I would really like to get him on my poster, by the way. I still haven't been lucky to get an autograph from him. But anyway, that's not the point. The point is, if these films get made, they're going to have to do some kind of de-aging. If they don't, that's automatically a red flag for me. If they do de-aging, And fingers crossed the de-aging technology's got good now, where it's not too uncanny valley. It will be a little bit uncanny valley, of course it will be. If it's good enough, then one day in like 2027, 2028, 2029, whenever the fuck these two movies are out and everything's done, and I'm a very, very old man, I could potentially produce a super extended version of the Fellowship of the Ring. And I could have the 17-year gap, and I could have Gandalf riding off, and then pretty much just have the hunt for Gollum there. Or have him come back and go like, is it secret? Is it safe? Now, Frodo, let me tell you about what happened. And then I just play the entire Hunt for Gollum movie. It's 2 movies, actually, isn't it? Jesus fucking Christ. I think we're going to have another Hobbit on our hands. Well, we're going to have another fan edit on our hands, ladies and gentlemen. We've got 2 movies and a very, very short narrative to tell. Let's cut those bitches down into 1 movie. I can't wait. Speaking of, I really want to do an edit of the War of the Rohirrim. That shit is going to be really short. That's going to be like a 5-minute movie, but I have a plan for it, and AI is going to help me as well. Kurt the Gamer says, have Gandalf's entire meeting with Saruman via flashback when he says, I was delayed. Well, I was tempted to do that. I have been tempted to do that. That could potentially be a shout, actually. Yeah. Would that... Actually, yeah, that could get around the problem, couldn't it? Of like the of going sequentially in chronological order. That could have happened before Frodo left the Shire, but now we're only seeing it later. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. Narratively, that might fuck with the flow completely, because we'd be bombing off and showing like this 10-minute flashback, but maybe I could cut it down somewhat, potentially. The one thing that I really wish I could change, and I don't think I can, but maybe AI will get to a point there where it can be done eventually, is changing Arwen into Glorfindel. I would love to do that. If there's a way that could be done. Oh, that would be so good. And someone's going to do it. One day, AI is going to be good enough. Someone will do that. Someone will change Arwen into Glorfindel. They'll have like a different actor, or they'll... whatever they do with AI. I've never used it personally myself, but I've been very impressed with the results and how fast it's been evolving, which is great. Carl says, could you ever see yourself getting into editing full time? You know, this is getting a little bit personal now. So I did my university degree in media production. And, you know, you're in A levels, you're at school, you don't really know what you want to do. Some people do. I wasn't in that boat, and uni was coming up and time was a ticking. And I thought, what do I do? What am I good at? What do I enjoy? And I was already doing sort of like fan edits, like really shitty ones. Like I didn't have anywhere near the technology or the editing capabilities that I did. But I was doing fan edits. I did like fan edits on the Transformers films. I remember, I think I did ones on Batman Forever and Batman and Robin. I tried to make them like the Tim Burton ones with the Danny Elfman soundtrack. Of course, it wasn't blended. I'd just lower the volume of the actual movie and put a new music track in, stuff like that. So I was always doing that. And I thought, well, I quite like editing, so I'm going to do media production. So I did 3 years of that. And then for many, many, many years, I was trying to get into editing, and I was getting nowhere with it. And I just couldn't get in. I guess I didn't have the portfolio. I didn't have the body of work behind me to get into it. And then I did land a couple of sort of production house jobs here and there, just little bits. It was like scant few here and there, sort of work experience kind of stuff. And I really didn't like editing stuff to a brief. I quickly found out, when it's like, right, you've got to produce a 3-minute commercial for this thing that you don't care about, and it's got to be edited to these specifics, and this is the brief. I didn't like that. So I quickly realized that editing was more of a hobby for me. And then since then, I've sort of like found myself in the career that I'm in now, which isn't video editing, but I do really enjoy it as a hobby, and I do enjoy it to unwind and just the creative process. But really just fan editing stuff that I like, that I'm into, where it's a film where I think maybe it's part of a series. Maybe there was like a great trilogy of films, and then this other film comes out in the series, which is shit. And I'm like, can I elevate that up a little bit to be better quality like those other ones? Maybe it's a film that had loads of potential, but there was a couple of missteps in there, in my opinion, and I want to sort of nudge it in a certain direction. But it's just really fun to get it in the editing suite and just experiment with a film. sometimes. But inherently, it's got to be part of a franchise or a film that you're passionate about, because I think that will shine through. So for me, obviously, like the big two are Lord of the Rings stuff and Star Wars. They're like the biggest two. Lord of the Rings being chief among them. But there's other ones that I've wanted to try as well. I've got like loads of projects on my mind, but the free time that I have to edit now is next to nothing. So I can only really get stuck in with editing when I'm sort of like on like summer holidays or Easter holidays or Christmas holidays, things like that. That's when I kind of have to do it. But like the Daniel Craig James Bond films, I fucking hated No Time to Die. And every time I watch it, I'm like, I need to change everything about this ending to see if I can do something with it. So I was thinking, oh, could I do an edit of the Daniel Craig James Bond films? But then I'm thinking, oh, do I have the passion there for it? Definitely not as much as Lord of the Rings and Star Wars. That's for damn sure. But yeah. Kurt the Gamer says, watch the cutscenes from Lego Lord of the Rings. They have a more streamlined version of the Gandalf and Saruman meeting using the audio from the movie too. You could structure it the same way. It's not a bad shout. Yeah, I will definitely check that out. I have played that game before, actually. It's a lot of fun. I really enjoy that. And it's a good free roam around Middle-earth game. Yeah, Middle-earth's really small, but I like how you can just walk from area to area unbroken in the map. It's really cool. Right, guys, I've gone on for 2 hours. I've gone on way longer than I expected to on this thing. But yeah, I guess in summary, bringing it back to the title, the problem with Ravenhill, I kind of just need to pick a lane in my mind. I don't know whether to just keep the edit as I've got it or maybe make some tweaks to it. Inherently, I think just sort of getting it out there and just talking about it now is like my own personal therapy session over the Hobbit edit. I guess talking about it now, I've realized that the film needs to remain consistent within itself. So maybe Tauriel and Legolas do need to be in there still. But I think I think what I'm going to settle on is combining M4's edit with mine. And what I mean by that is having the moment where Bilbo slips on the ring during the battle to get himself out of there, but then having a more fleshed out ending and having Tauriel and Legolas in there, having that exchange of Orcrist, so that then you can have the sword being given back to Thorin there. That way, you keep it to just Fili, Kili, and Thorin at Ravenhill. You get rid of Dwalin, so it doesn't have that as a plot hole, like where did Thorin go? You don't have Bilbo getting stuck in the fighting. You don't have him sort of throwing rocks and killing or knocking out orcs with rocks, like these Gundabad orcs. These rocks should be bouncing off these orcs. What are we talking about? And he's just absolutely bodying these orcs with rocks. I know that hobbits are meant to be keen with throwing stones. I get that, but still, it's a little bit dumb. And I know that shit happens in the Lord of the Rings as well. I know there's an extended scene in Fellowship where you see Merry and Pippin throwing rocks and knocking out Uruk-hai. That's a little bit dumb as well, but still. Yeah, I think some kind of meeting in the middle of the two edits maybe might be the best way to go with regards to that. Probably going to still keep Bolg being fleshed out earlier in the story to big him up as the big antagonist. Probably going to remove the Master of Lake Town scene and yeah, just see if AI can help with some of those awkward rotos. And then the Bilbo voiceover, I might try and experiment with that a little bit. I actually wanted to get your guys' opinion on that, whether you think that would be whether it would outstay its welcome a little bit too much, having Ian Holm's voice sort of periodically coming in the story. It needs to be a part in the story where there's a lull, but I guess the issue with that is that if you're going to have Bilbo doing a voiceover of the story, Bilbo needs to be aware of the events that happened. And I guess that could be an argument to keep Dwalin at Ravenhill, is that if you have Bilbo getting knocked out, who can recount the story to him? Yeah, you can have like all the White Council stuff. You can have, the Dol Guldur stuff as well. But you can accept that because Gandalf could have relayed that information to him. That information could have been, gotten to Bilbo in some way, shape, or form. But if you just have Thorin, Fili, and Kili going up to Ravenhill, Bilbo's knocked out, but Fili, Kili, and Thorin die. No one can relay the information as to the events that happened up there. But if Dwalin's up there too, then there's at least another person who saw the events transpire and can relay that information to Bilbo, which is why we're seeing it presented in the film. I don't know. I've got a shit ton of ideas, and it's all crazy. But I really appreciate you guys for joining me on this Saturday evening. It's made my Saturday evening very, very enjoyable. It's nice chatting with you guys, especially talking about Middle Earth related stuff. It's been a long time since I've done it, and it's always a pleasure. So, yeah, thank you to everyone that's tuned in. If you guys have any other thoughts regarding this edit, or if you have an idea for the ending that I should go with for this edit, please do let me know. Drop me a comment after this video is done, or send me a private message or something like that, and I'll get to it when I can, because I do truly want to make this edit as good as I possibly can and have it kind of be my swan song in the realm of Hobbit edits, if you will. Kurt says, that's what I've always wondered. Are we seeing what really happened or what Bilbo said happened? Yeah, I guess you could go with like the unreliable narrator thing. But the thing is, if I have old Bilbo saying stuff like, it was at that point that Fili was captured by Bolg and stabbed in front of Thorin. It's like, how do you know this? Fili can't tell you that. Killy sure as shit can't tell you that. And Thorin didn't tell you that before he died. So that's why I'm like, well, if Dwalin's up there as well, then you're like, well, Dwalin could have told him what he saw and everything like that. So, yeah, I don't know. There's arguments for and against it. So, all my ideas are out there. Guys, please comment. Let me know. Guide me. Counsel me. Tell me what I should do with this ending. I'm going to play with a couple of different versions of the ending and see which one I think works better. But let me hear from you guys. Right, I will bid everyone a very fond farewell tonight. I'm actually going to be live again on Monday for the next Don Bluth review. Me and Dale are going to be talking about An American Tail. And me and Dale are also going to try and watch the new Snow White movie at some point. I don't know whether that's going to be happening tomorrow. I think it might be a bit short notice tomorrow. But at some point, we will try and get a review out for you guys for Snow White. So look forward to that one. But yeah, a big thank you to everyone that's tuned in tonight. I really appreciate you guys. It's great talking with you. And yeah, I will see you very soon on the next video. Take care, everyone.